right off the top, this was as exciting a football game as you will watch this season, perhaps, at least throughout the season. Michigan State wins it 37-33. They keep the Paul Bunyan Trophy in one of the most exciting games that you'll find in college football each and every season. That was a special game in a rivalry situation.
Yeah, let me start off by saying this, to all the Michigan State individuals, be it on Instagram, social media, be it on person, be it on our comments and our chats. Everything that we said last week when we talked about this game as it related to Michigan State, it 100% was factual. If you look at what happened defensively for Michigan State, I saw Halliday ball out. Halliday was a grown man out there for the Michigan State Spartans. Outside of Halliday, the same things that I said I was interested to see what the secondary for Michigan State could do. Well, Cade McNamara, who doesn't pass the ball a lot, had 385 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I was right about that. The offensive line for the Michigan Wolverines, they held Michigan State's defensive line in check. In fact, I don't think Cade McNamara nor J.J. McCarthy got touched. Obviously, we'll talk about the fumbles. Everything that we said Kenneth Walker was a Heisman Trophy candidate and had played at that level all season. The big players, as you said, had to play. Oh, and did Kenneth Walker III ever show up and show out? 197 yards, 5 touchdowns, all his touchdowns coming in really big pivotal moments for the Michigan State Spartans. Everything that we said in this game, we said if you pick Michigan State, you might be right. If you pick Michigan, you might be right. I think Michigan did everything that they could have done to win this game. I think Michigan State just answered the bell more times. Michigan State, Peyton Thorne, you look at some of the throws that Peyton Thorne made in that fourth quarter, dimes. He dropped dimes when he had to. The receivers made plays, like I'm talking about Reed and Naylor catching the ball almost on the surface, almost on the ground. They made more plays at the end when it really mattered, especially that last 5 minutes of the third quarter into the first possession of the fourth quarter. Michigan State made the plays when they had to, and they won the game. They deservingly, they won it. Like, it's nothing to say. They won.
One of the things, too, with Michigan State, and we said it all week, in big games, your best players have to be your best players. Kenneth Walker III, 5 touchdowns in that game on that stage. What can you say about it? I mean, he was nearly unstoppable. I mean, he was unstoppable, not nearly. 5 touchdowns in the game, 3 yards shy of 200 yards rushing. And for Michigan, our best players, they didn't match Kenneth Walker's dominance in that game. For me, Aiden Hutchinson's a guy I would have liked to see a little bit more out of.
But Aiden had 2 sacks, and so did Ajabo. And barring,
Ajabo balled out a little bit.
We talked about him. We talked about him all season. We talked about Aiden Hutchinson. Barring an overturn, which I've never seen an overturn like that in sports. It is what it is. You can say what you want to. I've never seen it like that. That's another sack fumble to the crib. They had 4 sacks between them. They did what they were supposed to do. They dominated Michigan State's O-line. They had Peyton Thorne confused early on, and then it just turned. You saw at the end of the third and in the fourth quarter, you saw where the switch flipped on, and Michigan State's offensive line was able to handle that defensive rush and give them a little more time, or give Peyton a little more time to make completion.
For the Michigan Wolverines, too, it's very simple. You're up 16 points in the second half. You got to close that game out. I mean, that's just you have to do whatever you have to do to close that game out. Period. End of story. Now I know, and please, I understand. I saw my Twitter feed, my mentions, and all this stuff. I was complaining about the officials, and you know what? That call to me now. That overturned touchdown in the second quarter that would have given Michigan a 27-14 lead, I believe it would have been at the time. I have no idea, neither do you, could understand how that could have changed the game. Now, you could say, well, Michigan got the ball. They could stop settling for field goals and score the touchdown.
Some truth to that.
That was a touchdown.
Yeah.
And that was an overturned call. And if you don't think that call had any effect on that game, I beg to differ. I think that call did have something to do. You talk about the hold on Anthony. when the guy's out of bounds, it didn't affect the play. You probably could have let it go. Whatever the case may be, they had to settle for a field goal on that play as well. Those are two things that, happened throughout that game that could have went the other way. They didn't, and still, you were still up 16 points in the second half, late in the third quarter. You got to close the game out, and Michigan didn't do it.
Dad, I want to get you involved in this one. We were talking, and we actually were talking to D-Mac. Shout out to Big D Energy, always doing an amazing job. Neil Rue, Joy Bell, as well as Darren McCarthy, our own. I was talking to D-Mac, and D-Mac was saying he was watching the game with a friend of his that doesn't know much about college football, doesn't know who's where, and he saw the intro with Mel Tucker. You know how they do that walk. They walk that last mile and a half into the stadium, and then they walk to the locker room, and they had the camera on him. And D-Mac's boy said, when I saw the intensity in Mel Tucker's eyes, when I saw the suit and the way in which he was walking with a purpose. He was walking like he knew something. And I have to echo those sentiments. When I watched it, it looked like Mel Tucker was coming to play. It looked like Mel Tucker. And if you watch the game, his expression never changed from the walk into the stadium, to the locker room, to the first quarter, to down by 16, to tied, to up. His expression never changed. He walked in there with a purpose, and he walked out of there accomplishing that purpose.
Well, Mel Tucker, as I mentioned last week, is a very unique communicator and a leader of men. And how he communicates to his players, which appears to be a little bit mundane to us and not very boisterous, really gets across. His players believe in him. How you can get 40 new players who had never been in the program come in and play as a unit is some unique communication and leadership skills that very few people will have. When I saw him after that, when he walked in, he kind of walked up to the camera and acknowledged the camera on one of the pregame shows. I was like, he's serious. I'm a little bit worried about how his team is prepared, because he's kind of like, oh guys, we're for business today. And so with Mel Tucker again, and I'll talk later on about where I think Mel Tucker's future is. That team will play for him. What I truly believe is the best team won, because some of those calls, I'll go another one with you. When Kenneth Walker was crossing the goal line, he let the ball go as he was stepping over the goal line.
Deshaun Jackson.
Not one. Fox, how do you not have a camera directly on the goal line? Yeah. Because all the angles that I saw, maybe you guys saw a different one, was kind of a side angle, and you're looking at the foot on the line and the ball coming out, and you really can't tell had he broke the plane in the goal line or not. So I don't know. So we can go up and down it, but if you let the game be that close, that's what you allow to happen. So in my opinion, the best team won.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you look at, with everything that happened, you can talk about that call. You can talk about the holding on Anthony. You can talk about when they said that Peyton Thorne was down before he fumbled the ball. You can talk about all those calls, but they still had an opportunity. You look at that fourth quarter when the score is 37-33, and McNamara misses wide open wide receiver in the end zone. Like, he's wide open. They scored a touchdown right there. It's 1.5. It's 2 minutes left, and it's Michigan State ball. They got to go the length of the field to beat you. So they had enough opportunities. It's kind of like the Ohio State game. It's like everybody talks about the spot. Oh, the spot. But you didn't talk about 3rd and 10 when you let Clemens or Samuel get 9.5 yards. Right. No one talks about that.
Right.
So with that being said, Michigan, yes, there's some questionable things that happened in the game. Michigan lost. Michigan had opportunities. They were in positions, and they lost.
Well, they absolutely did. And you go back to, you could, in a game like this that finishes the way it did, as close as it was, you can go back to just about any one play throughout a 4.5-hour game, essentially, and pull and pick it. You could go back all the way to the first quarter and talk about that Corum dropped pass.
Touchdown.
On third down, Corum drops a pass. It has nothing but
him and the safety, and he has way too much wiggle
in front of him. He drops a pass. That could have been a touchdown. There's just so many different things throughout that game. Look, I will tell you, I underestimated the Michigan State Spartans. I underestimated that football team.
Look at you right there. Look at that.
And because I think for both of these teams, this was really the first time they played anybody.
Yeah. It is.
That could punch them in the mouth. I think this is the first time Michigan played somebody that could punch them in the mouth, and I think this is the first time Michigan State played anybody that could punch them in the mouth. They both responded, and in the end, Michigan State punched one too many times.
Yeah, to be honest, if I'm looking at this game and I'm assessing it, whether I'm Michigan State or Michigan, if I'm looking at Michigan actually walked out of the game looking better than they did going in. You didn't know if Cade McNamara could throw the ball. You didn't know if they had any other wide receivers. Guess what? They answered that question. You didn't know if that defensive line was for real. Will Ojabo or Aiden Hutchinson, or had they just been playing lackluster opponents? Oh, no. That defensive line is real. So from Michigan's standpoint, they just didn't make the plays in the end. But they walked out of that game better from a perspective. And Michigan State, same thing. With the exception of the secondary, I liked everything that I saw about Michigan State.
We got a lot to get to today. What about Jim Harbaugh and his record in big games against rivalries? Against rivals? What does that mean for him moving forward? We'll talk to Stan about that. Also, if you were maybe driving around this morning listening to a radio station, you may have heard Stan Edwards call up to a particular radio show. You will hear that. We'll get Stan's reaction and the backstory on that. We'll do that next. This is Ermanni and Edwards.
Woodward Sports Network, The Bottom Line.